Tell you. I don't know what to tell you. Have we had trouble with that thing, Tyler? Pop machine? No, the pop machine there. Taking money.
Yeah, especially when you're coming off of the top shelves. You won't fall all the way down, it falls against the glass, it stays there.
You know what Shaven does? He just rattles the dang thing.
Yeah, but he's big enough.
He is big enough.
Some of us are fine. No, that's what I was just thinking, is it still not structured?
So you want to accept that? Should have a pop-up to accept. Maybe this is.
Okay, before we begin, we'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We'll now call the special city council meeting to order. Time is 5:30. The Opens Meeting Act is posted on the rear wall next to the agendas. This time we'll have roll call.
Please vote for roll call.
Motion carries 7-0, Mayor.
Okay, moving on to item 1. Ordinance 5586 to approve government salary ordinance. Again, this would be second reading and consider request to suspend rules and move to final reading. This time we'll have staff report.
Honorable Mayor and City Council, Jennifer McDuffie, Director of Human Resources. This is the salary ordinance proposed for the city government side of the organization. Again, like I explained last night, it contains the increases that were negotiated with the AFSCME, FOP, and fire collective bargaining units, and some additional pay grade changes to non-union based on comparability. I'm happy to take questions.
Questions for staff? Councilman Yerger.
Earlier today, I sent you and Jody 8 questions, I guess, some of which I think were covered last night. But I didn't have necessarily the answers in my notes from the meeting last night while we were discussing. I wondered what's the status of those currently?
I believe the first 4 or so questions were about the comparability arrays that we had done. We did discuss those with legal. Do you want to weigh in, Travis? And
As far as the array studies go, due to the union negotiation still is ongoing. If the council would like to discuss those array studies, we would need to do that in executive session. I'd recommend that be done in executive session.
But there's no problem putting it in the public record once it's available.
The issue of once all the contracts are finished with, we don't want to reveal any negotiation tactics for the future, but that's something that can be addressed.
Before we move along too far, could I offer these for the record, please, just so that the rest of the council knows what was asked today?
Oops, excuse me. Is there a second to receive? Councilman Ellis. Cast your votes.
Motion carries 7-0, Mayor.
So I guess for legal, and you can respond too, I guess, Jennifer, but to the extent then that we're supposed to make judgments on salaries, but we can't do so with information unless we discuss it in executive session. Is that what I'm hearing from your answer?
As far as the array studies go, yeah. If you want to discuss the arrays, then yeah, we'll go into executive session. But I don't think any of the information in here, the
It's just
arrays
the
are,
ordinance.
No, I understand the ordinance and what's in our packet material today doesn't reflect any of that. Last night and what's in my questions that were submitted asked for the underlying studies that were performed on behalf of, I thought you said all positions were restudied.
Mhm.
And that becomes sort of a ground or a base for all future changes that we might make. And we make these changes periodically, but when we do, the study that was performed last year, whatever, is the basis for whatever we do until we do another study. So to me, those are quite helpful. They're quite informative. And I think we asked for these in previous times. I can't remember if we were given them for sure or not. I know that they've been requested to support changes that we made to salary ordinances in the past. Do you recall?
So I think it's my understanding that we've made a request that council could come in and request and see the information in your office. Is that correct?
I don't remember for
I think
sure.
Travis.
Yeah, the array studies are available for council members to review. You just have to do it at municipal building with Ms. McDuffie.
Okay. So another question I had was with regards to the statements made by the consultant last evening was that the assistant, or not the assistant, the city administrator's job is a contracted job. And even though they studied it, right? The discussion was, well, that's not how you probably fill that position anyway. Because it's probably going to be a contract job. It's an appointment by the mayor. It's probably a negotiated contract as the current city administrator is. That's probably not going to change. Would you agree with that?
How would you anticipate that or expect that, or how would that change, I guess, is, I'm not for sure.
Well, I'm likening it to the union contracts where don't want to disclose your position before you go into union discussion as to, well, what are the salaries that I would necessarily offer? If we're going to be contracting on a city administrator job sometime down the road, would you want to be flagging up for purposes of discussion? These are my get started points. Wouldn't it be better for the city to be able to be in a position of, this is my offer, rather than this is my scale?
That argument could be made. I cannot tell you why that city administrator position is in there. That's preceded me. So that's just been something we've updated as we've gone year by year. That could be a perspective. You could also look at it as far as by having that in the salary ordinance, that gives the mayor or whoever's negotiating that contract parameters, which they have to stay with it. And they can't offer someone an exorbitant amount, $300,000 for a city administrator position.
Well,
So-
there's two sides to that. It all,
Mhm.
Any other questions for staff? Councilman Ellis?
Can you explain to me why we can't get the studies from a cemetery worker pay in different cities compared to the cemetery worker here in Fremont? How that's affecting union negotiations?
The array studies themselves reflect the city's approach to how those arrays are done and how that affects salaries throughout the city. And they're available to you if you want to go review them. I'm just saying right now they're protected information rightfully under the Open Meetings Act. And if the council wishes to release them to the public, which I don't advise that happen, you're certainly able to do that.
I still don't get how they're going to be of danger. I mean, we're talking, the consultant that was here last night said he went to 8 different cities to find out how much a cemetery worker makes. Comes back here and gives us a report that says our cemetery workers here, here's the 8 cemetery workers. This is a comparison study. How is that?
It's protected negotiation information that is covered by the statute.
Oftentimes organizations will use the same tactic regardless of whether the position is union or non-union. So if we do release the non-union information, that does. And I'm trying to not reveal our negotiation strategy, but that may show the unions our strategy on how
Haven't we already released a lot of negotiating tactics by having the other contracts out in the public?
Not necessarily. The arrays have not been released.
They all know, the utility sides get 2.5%, the city sides get 3.5 or 3%. I mean, what else?
The arrays have not been released.
Okay. Well, I would like those arrays made available to the city council and the public as soon as possible. So whenever that negotiation's finished, can we figure out a way to post those? Because those have a huge detrimental value to us and the pay increases that we're given. Not that I don't trust it, I just want to be able to verify that these comparisons were in fact where we were going, because I'm voting and I can't take it back unless we then go back and say, well, they didn't come out like they said they did, and now we've got to go back and retract salaries. So I just want to make a very informed decision, and I don't feel I can make that decision without looking at that. And that I just don't see it, how it's affecting union negotiations, but I have to take your word for it.
Councilman Jensen?
Unless I'm mistaken, you just said he can look at that.
You can go in there and look at it. It's protected. It just can't be public, but anybody on council can go look at that at any time.
That's true, but the information that is obtained remains confidential with the city. Yeah.
Councilman Gibson.
I had the same question that Councilman Ellis had. That is the largest, that's the largest, whether he got left out the last negotiations or what happened, but that's the largest increase of all the workers. I was just curious about why that particular job jumped up 6.5 and
You're talking about the cemetery sexton?
cemetery, yes.
Because when we did the array and we did the comparabilities, that position was way underpaid. It may have been below everything else at that percentage. So it was one that historically we haven't kept up with the market. We haven't kept up with what other people have done.
Okay.
Any other questions for staff? Any comments from the public? Oh, sir. Well, wait. I'll ask you to go to the podium after. You go to the podium after Ms. Jacobus.
Susan Jacobus, 1805 North D Street. In times past, we actually had a raise. And Mr. Lakeman was on at the time. Mr. Coons is no longer on the council. We actually were given those a raise. I'm not sure what independent entity had created that array. We were compared to Beatrice and Bellevue was on there, North Platte was on there. Harney was on there, Grand Island was on there, Hastings was on there. There was a wide array, some of them, and this was done in 2017. And Mr. Lakeman, I'm sure you recall this, and I probably still have a copy buried somewhere. We were given that array, and we are given that at this level. I don't know that it was anything other than during our strategic planning, because we had an independent person come in and do our strategic planning. So that's how it was done at that time. And it was widely discussed and openly discussed with different personnel. But again, we didn't discuss union other than where they were falling within the array. And there was no discussion about, well, they're going to land here or there. We just knew what that array showed. It showed the high and the low, but that information was availed. That said, the majority of these, I really don't have an issue with as far as the increases. I have a little pause because some of these are quite hefty, both on the government side and the utility side. And with what the COBRAs are and what I could total up somewhat loosely, you could actually, not COBRAs, I misspoke. Some of the COLAs and the other stepped increases, if they're done all at once, would more than pay and fund your firefighters, not just this year, but also next year. So just be cognizant as you're going through your ordinance. Thank you.
Please state your name and address.
My name is Alex Cassidy. My address is 1523 North Platte Avenue. And which of you council members is my representative? Whose district am I in? Mark. Thank you. My comment is that I support Glenn Ellis's request that city doings be publicized and all information in these reports or surveys be made public record. Anytime any member of any government says, trust me, you immediately have grounds for distrust. Thank you.
Steve Ray, 1445 North Irving. I just like to say that looking at some of them comparables, I understand that we, as a government, must have been underpaying a lot of those people, but that would be from past councils. And I don't think they can hold this council responsible to make them wages like, say, the cemetery worker going that much in one time. you're gonna have to do it in increments. You're already looking for money, and that would save some money. I mean, it's hard to say that, but I don't think a lot of businesses wouldn't come up and say, oh, well, we've underpaid this guy for 13 years, so now we're just gonna jump him clear up here. It's just not the way to do it. And also the COLAs, I've worked for companies and stuff, and it's like, well, and they made billions of dollars and they couldn't give you more than 1%. Well, we just can't see it. We need to save money and invest. Well, you're kind of in the same boat. You're looking for some money to find firefighters. So I would say that you need to really look at the comparables and you need to look at the COLAs. And yes, it's a tough decision to make, but you need the money elsewhere.
Any other comments from the public? Any additional comments from council? Councilman Yerger?
Couple of comments. I'm quite honestly, I'm really disappointed that we don't waive the ordinance for discussion of matters such as this that are of such importance and to be timed for 5 minutes. I find that appalling given the schedules we've been on. Nevertheless, let me just say this. The charts that were handed out last night, I think that the front of the room offered these to Ms. McDuffie. Is that correct? Do you have any problems with the array of information that's portrayed in any of these charts? If you've had a chance to look at them?
I just glanced through them. One thing I did notice is that the numbers for police officer and firefighter are incorrect. They do not work 2,080 hours a year. Firefighters work 2,756, and I believe police officers are around 2,200 a year.
I believe you're correct. They have different hours. They actually work more hours, which makes their rates even higher, I guess, but they have to work more hours to do it. The graphs were created on comparability, so standard 2,080 hours was used. I understand that's not what they make. But other than that, you don't have any objections to these charts.
I didn't go number by number, no, but what I glanced at, I didn't see anything extremely out of whack.
Okay, thank you. And with regards to the questions that were submitted earlier today, and we've had some discussion about the release of the wage scale studies and the like, but the other information, I was pretty sure that some of that information had actually been discussed and responded to at last night's meeting. Was that incorrect? And I asked for all new data? Because if so, then getting that data summarized today would have seemed to have been pretty straightforward.
If that's what all we needed to do today, that would be a true statement, but we had lots of other things going on today, like preparing for next Tuesday's agenda. We were able to scrap together a couple of reports that we could try and answer. One of the questions that I had reading through the requests was there's no reference to city or utility. Would your proposal include utility, or is this only directed at city employees?
No, I guess I should have been clear. It probably should include both. Obviously, what we're looking for is what's the impact, especially when we're getting into the items 4 through 8, what's the impact of these salary changes, either union or non-bargained? And so, yes, you're right. That should have included both. My error on that report. I would want it to be complete because in the end, I'm trying to evaluate what the overall impact is. And as a part of trying to fund this stuff, how and where are we going to find the money? And worst case scenario, I want to look at what would it take for $1,000 of evaluation, as we did before when we were looking at $1.5 million of tax relief. If we can't find the money, if you come back to us and say, there's no way I can't find a dime to fund firefighters, there's still an alternative. People may not like it, but there's an alternative. And I want to know what that impact is for every $500,000.
So I do have a question on number 8.
Number 8 doesn't pertain to an item on the agenda today, but the other items 4 through 7 about the step increases, that's fine. Number 8 should be you should. hold
It has a
back some
direct bearing.
budget.
I have to say, legal, it has a direct bearing because if you total up the wages that we're being asked to approve,
Uh-huh.
they sum up to an amount, whatever that is. And that amount is translatable to tax levy. Simple as that. It is all tied to these wage adjustments that we're making. So I don't think it's a stretch to say this is interrelated.
The tax levy issue you're saying is relatable to the
Amount
salary
of
ordinances?
salaries that you might cover if you were actually to raise the levy for $500,000 to cover firefighters. If that was an option, what does it take? What's the impact?
In order to increase the salaries or decrease the salaries?
No, in order to. And my time's gonna expire. I give up. That's the problem with these kind of meetings. You can't even have dialogue. I quit.
Councilman Legban.
Yeah, I think in 4 through 7, I think our city has negotiated, both parties, everyone has negotiated in good faith. The negotiations are done for the most part. Everyone's happy with it, I guess, to a point, satisfied with it. And now we're suddenly gonna try to change a COLA or pit the union against non-union. I don't agree with any of that. I don't think it should be done. And I think the negotiations have been all done in good faith. We've hammered it out. They're ready. They're ready to go. So I want to again thank our staff for working their tails off and getting this done.
Councilman Ellis.
I want a little more clarification on that. Number 8, we can't talk about tonight because it doesn't relate to the government salaries. Is that what you're saying?
The salary ordinance that are on the agenda tonight, yeah.
But he just made an extremely good argument that stated that if we have to accept these salaries and we can't accept them with the information given to us, now we're accepting them. We're looking for other alternatives
Mhm.
to help us fund the firefighters. And
But you would want to change the firefighter salaries?
no, we're looking at the tax levy.
Okay, but
Changing the tax levy.
What does it have to do with the salary ordinances?
Because if we can't do anything with the salaries, then we have to, there's only certain places we can come up with money, salaries. And adjusting them some sort of, instead of a COLA 3, we put a 2.5, or we start adjusting the levy. So that's why the question is asked today.
Oh. I don't see how the adjusting of the levy affects the salary.
I just want
ordinances.
you to be on the record to tell me that I can't do this again.
Can't do that.
We can't talk about number 8. Just
Well,
like, you-
I just want to prevent a violation of open meetings act. That's all I'm
Alright,
trying to do.
Councilwoman Ganem.
Reflecting over this years, I've been on council, we kept talking about property tax relief and watching our property taxes, and the biggest number of calls that I get is, please don't raise our property taxes anymore than what they are raised to. Additionally, we also, on the other hand, out of one side of our mouths, we talk about, we don't pay our people enough. We need to upgrade their pay. I mean, you've heard it at the meetings as well, too. Police officers, well, gosh, we train them and they go where they can make more money. We need to upgrade our pay. The 911 calls, I mean, we say we're not paying them enough. When you can work at McDonald's for $16 an hour pushing a broom, you know, and yet we ask our 911 people who answer the phone under high pressure, we pay them that, we almost match McDonald's. So now on the other hand, we say, we want to raise your taxes so we can pay for our firemen. We can't have it both ways. And I'm not so sure, listening to the input that I'm getting, that I am willing to raise that levy this year.
Any other comments from council? I'd take a motion in regards to this item. Councilman Legban.
I make a motion to hold second reading of ordinance 5586.
Councilman Jensen,
I will second.
cast your votes.
Motion carries 5-2, Mayor.
Second reading.
An ordinance of the city of Fremont, Nebraska pertaining to pay plan for officers and employees, repealing ordinance number 5551 and all other ordinances and parts of ordinances in conflict herewith, providing for publication in pamphlet form and providing an effective date on second reading.
Moving on to item 2, ordinance 5587 to approve utility salary ordinance.
Mayor,
Yes.
I think there's been a request for the first one.
Oh. Thank you, Councilman Legman. I take a motion to suspend rules and move to final reading. Councilman Jensen,
I will make that motion.
Councilman Gibson,
I'll second, second that.
cast your votes.
Motion fails 5-2.
Now moving on to item 2, ordinance 5587 to approve utility salary ordinance. This would be second reading and consider request to suspend the rules and move to final reading. We'll have staff report.
Honorable Mayor and City Council, Jennifer McDuffie, Director of Human Resources. This is a salary ordinance for the utility side of the organization. As we've discussed, the IBEW contract is still in negotiation, so we do not have an increase established for them. We are suggesting a 2.5% increase at this time for non-union staff. I'm happy to take questions.
Any questions for staff? Councilman Yerger,
You plan on adjusting that 2.5% to something other than that once the union contract is done, or you plan to discriminate against those that got 3% versus 2.5%, depending on which wage schedule you're on?
I think our plan is, it depends on what IBEW ends up with. But if we need, we would reevaluate it once IBEW is done negotiating. We just didn't feel it was appropriate to hold back and not give non-union anything at this point.
Let me rephrase my question. Let's assume that the union says, I'm going to be extreme. They get a 5% COLA.
Mhm.
You built into the budget 2.5.
Mhm.
In the other ordinance that's already been looked at tonight, 3% was built in, as I
Mhm.
recall. So would you be allowing a 5% COLA on the employees that are on the utility wage scale? Because it balances with the union contract at 5%?
We haven't made that determination yet. We would have to evaluate it once the contract gets done.
I understand that. My question is hypothetical.
And I can't give you a hypothetical answer because we haven't evaluated that. We haven't discussed it. So I can't tell you what would be done at that
So
point.
it could be anywhere from 2.5%, 3%, or whatever the union ends up with a COLA and part of their negotiations. And the only thing that's built into the budget at this juncture is 2.5%.
That is incorrect. We have built in, but into the budget, we've built in additional increases other than the 2.5%.
No. For COLA, 2.5% on the utility side is in the budget or something other?
I don't remember for sure.
There isn't an amount that's built in, but it's not 2.5%.
Okay.
Oh, and we don't know what that is, and we're not supposed to know what that is.
I don't know that we want to discuss it because we're currently in negotiations.
I understand. So it's very plain. We're supposed to approve the budget for things that we don't know. It's kind of like the Nancy Pelosi budget. Pass it now and I'll tell you what's in it later. Strange.
any other questions for staff? Any comments from the public?
It's plain that you're about to vote on buying the proverbial pig in the poke.
Name and address, please.
Alex Cassidy, 1523 North Platte Avenue.
Thank you.
Susan Jacobus, 1805 Northeast Street. Your budget process has not been as long and arduous as they have been times past. It just seems like you're on a shorter time schedule. I would ask that prior to passing your final, both on government and utility, that you understand exactly what you're passing without blank checks and have some open-endedness. Take a good hard look at all the differences in your levels. Some of you know we've been looking at some of the levels or grade pay for a few positions for a few years, always told the money's not there, we're not going to do it, it's not time to do comparison. Took 4 years, almost 4 years, just to get a few of these positions looked at. So I appreciate that some of these were considered, but there are others that are already on the top heavy side. So know exactly what you're passing. And please, if this goes to a meeting tomorrow night, do something about allowing some open discussion so that each and every one of you understands exactly what you're passing and what you're being asked to pass. That whole trust me, baby, isn't the time to be put into play here during a budget hearing. Thank you.
Any other comments from the public? Any additional comments from council? Councilman Yerger?
Just one follow-up since staff didn't get to the questions today, and I'm wondering whether they'll get to the questions tomorrow. And I'm especially interested in knowing whether or not the questions that deal with the dollar impact 4 through 8 would be done if in fact you have astute people on the union side that could extrapolate from the number of employees through the mathematics of what we've got here and we get to the numbers you're trying to protect. Do I expect to have answers for 4 through 8 before we have discussion on final reading on these salary ordinances or not?
I would just revise number 8 to say annual impact on the salary ordinances.
Annual impact on the salary ordinances.
Yep.
That's not what I'm asking for in item 8. I want to know what the levy effect is of doing $500,000 worth of salaries if we can't fund them through the budget. I want to know if we had to, and I am not suggesting that we do. I am only trying to make sure that if staff comes back to us and says, we can't find money to, now that you canceled out the immigration ordinance money, we can't find a dime. We're not funding firefighters. That's not acceptable. Not acceptable to me. It's not going to be acceptable to the public. An alternative, which was left in for us, whether we like it or not, is to look at how much does that translate to if we did have to raise the levy. Is that $30 for a $100,000 house? $100 per house? We need to know what that information is. So just finding out the annual increase isn't what I'm asking for in item 8, because I'm looking for alternatives here to what we ought to be considering as to the impact in our budget, not specifically approving for this, but how we handle things in the budget in general, which is coming up right on the heels of approving all this salary. So I don't want anybody modifying my question 8.
Okay.
So back to my question, and I guess to the extent that the answer is yes to that, my question is yes to that before we get to the meeting, so we'll have a chance to look at it, or no, we'll bring it to the meeting and explain it to you as we have in the past, and you won't have a chance to do any work with it before you come.
So based on information that particularly you mentioned general fund in particular, we had, Dan had already ran a report that gave us some of that information. So number 4, the dollar impact to the budget of all the non-bargained employee step increases year 1 and year 2. That amount is for 2022 is 27,500. And we did not calculate it for the following year. Would you? A full year's worth would be $55,000.
And is that for both, as you asked me earlier, the city
No.
side and utility side?
This is general fund only.
So this is just general fund only? Okay.
Yes.
Based on the clarification you asked me for, will I expect to get the utility side as well?
In that case, on the utility side, the amount for the first year would be $67,324, $325. And the annualized amount would be $134,650. But one needs to remember there would be an impact to the city based on those, but only for those shared departments. And so the impact to the city's general fund would be only $6,000 in the first year and $12,000 in the second year. That would be for those shared departments that we talked about last night.
Well, my time is going to expire in 28 seconds, so I'll just ask again, if you can return information to us in an early enough fashion, it would be useful for tomorrow's meeting. That would be great. In an email, please.
I have a question on number 5 and 7. You're referring to presently known bargained employees COLA.
I'll just speak. After last night, I gave a directive to staff that says, we need to do what it takes to find dollars available in regards to the firefighters without raising the levy. I am not in favor of raising the levy and a lot of the things mentioned by Councilwoman Ganem in regards to our valuation decrease that we had. And so, that was my directive to staff today, is to bring back an option or whatever we can do to figure this out. And so, now is the time we're talking about the salary ordinances. So I'll just leave it at that. Councilman Ellis.
I just want to get this right again, and I appreciate all the hard work you guys are doing, but we're being asked to vote on an ordinance that has money in it or has blanks in it that will be filled in later by another ordinance that comes through, or those numbers, we're going to use last year's numbers until the union contract is solidified, and then we'll get another round of ordinances coming through.
You're specifically talking about the IBEW ordinance. So the IBEW bargaining unit. So what will happen is October 1st, if there is not a new contract that has been negotiated and agreed upon and approved, then the current contract holds. So their current wages will hold until a new contract has gone through the process and has been approved. And that subsequent salary, we would bring a salary ordinance to the council for those raises based on what that contract ends up being. And we would bring another ordinance then. And then once that ordinance goes into effect, then those wages would change.
So the wages in here now are simply the ones that haven't changed.
They're just copied from what we currently have today. And they will hold until, again, until a new contract is negotiated.
When did salary negotiations start with the IBW?
I'm sorry, I'm trying to remember.
I was told
They were-
today that the firefighters' salaries negotiations started in July. Is that right? Is that correct?
That might be, we've been going since June and July. Yeah.
IBEW was about the same time.
I don't believe they were ready until a little bit later.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilman Legband.
Yeah, I just, couple things. First of all, we are gonna hire 6 firemen. And as someone said, they're worried about they're not gonna get, because we can't find the money, but we are. So one way or another, we're gonna hire the firemen. Second of all, I'd like to give the staff a little chance to try and come up with the money to hire them instead of jumping on their cases right away here. We just, last night, took away the ordinance. So I'd like to give staff, and I think maybe they can find a way to make this all work. And so again, I appreciate all the work they're doing, and hopefully they can find a way to make it work where we can hire these firemen. And I just want to reiterate what Ms. Ganem said, is that no, I am not ready to raise the tax, the levy at all. I'm with you to keep it where it's at and plug away as much as we can.
Any other comments from council? If there are none, I take a motion in regards to this item. Hold second reading. Councilman Legband,
I make a motion to hold second reading of ordinance 5587.
Councilman Gibson.
I'll second that.
Okay, ready? Cast your votes.
Motion carries 5-2.
And there's been a request to, oh, thank you. We'll have second reading.
An ordinance of the city of Fremont, Nebraska pertaining to pay plan for officers and employees repealing ordinance number 5577 and all other ordinances and parts of ordinances in conflict herewith, providing for publication in pamphlet form and providing an effective date on second reading.
Thank you, Tyler. Councilman Jensen,
I'll make the motion to consider a request to suspend the rules and move to final reading.
Councilman Legband,
I'll second it.
cast your votes.
Motion fails 5-2.
Take a motion to adjourn. Councilman Jensen,
A motion to adjourn.
Councilman Legband,
I'll second that.
cast your votes.
Motion carries 7-0, Mayor.
We are adjourned. See you tomorrow night at